And honestly, I don't feel that I had Hashkafa in learning until I left yeshiva, when I could do my own thing. And that's when I really started taking off, because I wasn't constricted.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Starting, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we welcome back Rav Gil Student, a scholar, writer, and founding editor of Torah Musics. He also works full-time as an actuary. Rav Gil recently came out with a new book titled Articles of Faith, Traditional Jewish Belief in the Internet Era. The book dives into a number of topics that have great relevance for Bnei Torah in the workforce. In this episode, we talk about Emunah, Hashkafa, life beyond yeshiva, and the internet. I highly recommend the book. You can order it with the link in the show notes. The episode also includes some questions from you, our listeners. These questions were gathered in our quiet WhatsApp group. If you enjoy this podcast and want to be able to submit questions for future guests, as well as receive bonus content and episode updates, make sure to join the group today. The link is in the show notes. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Starting. Rav Gil Student, welcome back to Starting for the second time. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yaakov, thank you for inviting me again. I've been listening to the podcast over time, and it's just spiraling and increasing, and you're doing amazing things on it. It's an honor to be back.
Thank you. And we're here to actually celebrate your new book, which came out recently. It's called Sefer Nekudos HaMachlokes, Articles of Faith, subtitled Traditional Jewish Belief in the Internet Era. And I'm very excited to have started reading it. I enjoyed it a lot so far, and then there's a lot still there to unpack. And I want to talk about some of the central themes. So it's called Articles of Faith, where you open up talking about belief and emunah. And maybe you could even start, you mentioned this very briefly in our last conversation, but a little bit of a deeper dive into your own personal journey to faith in clarifying some of the fundamental principles that we believe in.
Sure. I mean, my story is, my personal story is, I grew up not from, but traditional. And I went to a Salmon Schechter Elementary School and then an Orthodox co-ed high school in Frisch in New Jersey. And in high school, something flipped on in my brain, and I started believing. And so some of what it was that I had biases against Orthodoxy. I actually started high school thinking Orthodox rabbis are not very smart, and I was shocked. I remember my 9th grade Rebbe, one time I challenged, we were joking around, and he used a word, and I said, "Rabbi, I don't think that's a word." And then he did something which would not be done today, but he pulled out from his desk this massive dictionary, which we used to be a thing, dictionaries. He opened it up and showed me the page where that word actually was in the dictionary. I was wrong, and he was right. And the fact that I remember this 40 years later just tells me that I needed to get past my biases against Orthodox Judaism or traditional Jewish belief. And then I was not an NCSY kind of guy at all. It was more of an intellectual thing that I believed. And from there, I moved on to YU, part of the right-wing modern Orthodox community. And after yeshiva, I went out into the real world, and I realized I had a lot missing in my Jewish education. Even though I went to Orthodox high school, Orthodox college, and what year of Kollel, there was a lot missing from my education, particularly in Hashkafa. So I started buying Sfarim and learning some of the basics. And I also started looking at some of this academic treatment of Judaism. And all this expanded my horizons, but still deep in my kishkas, I'm this Ben Torah, this old yeshiva guy, and I still abide by the Piskei Halacha and of my Rebbeim, and I still look up to them as the main influences on me. But it expanded my horizons in terms of Hashkafa, what Hashkafas are out there, and what are the big questions, and what are the answers. I personally believe we should jettison all of modern Hashkafa and go back to the Rishonim. I think the Rishonim were right. Okay, fine, some of the science and the metaphysics needs to be reworked, but generally speaking, we should be taking our Hashkafa from the Ramban Alatar, from the Moreh Nevuchim, and I think that's where when I hear people, and I'll inject a little controversy into this podcast for you. When I hear people talking about how we need new ideas, new approaches, whether it's the Dati Leumi, Eretz Yisrael, we need an Eretz Yisrael Hashkafa or something new, Hasidus, whatever. I just think, why do we need something new when the old stuff works? The whole idea of Judaism is that we have a Masorah going back to Sinai, and new approaches don't really work well for me. I like the old tried and true Hashkafa. I'm not quite sure where you wanted me to go with this, but I'm just taking it in my own direction. So feel free to jump in.
So that's great. So you mentioned that you're an intellectual guy and you had an intellectual journey, and you mentioned that you're not an NCSY guy. And in our last conversation, you also spoke a little bit about the exaggerated reliance on inspiration and other sort of more emotional forms of religious motivation, if you want to call it that. And I'm wondering who you think is the target audience of your book, meaning could you maybe define a demographic of people who you're trying to speak to when you're going to these very heavy-hitting analysis, these very intellectual ideas?
So the audience is, I would say, there is a very, very small audience. My Hashkafa tends to be fairly to the right, but I bring in sources that are non-traditional and including non-Orthodox to make the argument, to make the case for a traditional Hashkafa on, let's say, biblical criticism. So there are some new approaches coming out of some of the yeshivas in Israel about how to deal with all the challenges of biblical criticism. I've dabbled in that, but none of that really appeals to me. I believe in the traditional reading of Chumash with Mefarshim, and that's the proper way, and that will answer the questions that we have. But to respond to biblical criticism, so I explore in this book some different approaches from the conservative movement, traditionalist conservative movement, and even within the Orthodox movement. And I find them wanting. And instead, I propose another approach that, let me tell you, Yaakov, if you want controversy, when I got up and said this at a conference, a semi-academic conference, I was speaking as a rabbi, I made the argument that we have to believe that every word in Tanakh, not Chumash, Tanakh, comes from Hashem. And it means the same thing. The same word means the same thing, unless there's reason to believe not internally. But it comes from the same hashkafa, regardless of which sefer it is in, whether the words in Vayikra or in Zechariah or in Mishlei, because that is how Chazal read it. That's the entire Torah Shebaal Peh. The Gemara, Mishnah, Midrash all assumes that the same word means the same thing throughout Tanakh and comes from the same perspective, same hashkafa. There might have been different authors, Nevi'im and whatnot, but it all comes from Hashem. And that, when I said that at a conference, people literally got up and started yelling at me, and not non-from people, but the people with the yarmulkes on, let's say from Bar Ilan, because that is, let's say, fairly red wing. But I make that argument that it is. I'm not calling anyone an apikoros, anything like that, but it is inconsistent with traditional Judaism for the past few thousand years to say that there were different authors with different perspectives and different hashkafas, even in Nas.
Okay, maybe I'll try to rephrase the question because that was very interesting, but it didn't really answer what I was trying to get at. And I'll say it like this: among people who I can imagine, reading some of the articles that are on your website and in this book, I could imagine two types of people. One would be the person who, it's very interesting. It's good, hack for the coffee room. It's important, but maybe more for the enrichment value. There are others who might view this as like central to their being able to stay from is having these defenses of traditional beliefs like biblical criticism. And I'm wondering, in that latter category, could you talk a little more about what type of people, how would you define that demographic of people who really need these defenses, these intellectual defenses, in order to stay on the straight path of traditional Judaism?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I did get off on a tangent. So let me take a step back, though, and not answer your question directly for a second time. I have friends who are very focused on outreach to the 90% of Jews who are not Orthodox. And I support them, and I give them brachos, and I wish them well, and I try to help them in any way that I can. But that's not what I do, and that's not really what I'm good at. I speak to the Orthodox community, the people who are either educated Orthodox or who want to be more educated from the Orthodox perspective, whether they are Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative, people who want to hear this perspective, who are interested in the intellectual arguments. So some of them will be people who are from and looking to defend from people who have maintained their traditional hashkafa, and they have no questions about it. They just want to be able to defend it better. That's one segment of the audience. The other are people who are grappling with these issues, and they're reading from all different kinds of places. I believe they should also be reading stuff from the right-wing community, the traditionalist community. They want to read it, and we should need to have a voice in that room. It should not be just them reading sophisticated analyses from secular scholars and non-Orthodox scholars. They should also be reading sophisticated analyses from Orthodox scholars. And then there are other people who are on the outside looking in. I know I have Christian readers, Catholic readers. I have Reform rabbis and conservative rabbis who they might not agree with me, but they're interested in hearing what I have to say, and might help them formulate their responses, or they just want to be familiar with the beliefs in different communities. And either way, tend to find my friends among those who are seekers, intellectual seekers, regardless of which community they belong in. Meaning, I have more in common on some level, obviously not all levels, on some level with someone who's Catholic and trying to understand Catholicism in the modern world or postmodern world. I feel a kinship to them probably more than someone looking to light up their soul with song and with dance. Not chas v'shalom, there's anything wrong with that. It's just that people have the same concerns and interests that I do. So I know there are some of them who also feel that way, and they're looking at the Orthodox community, and they see on the inside looking at we are big critics of ourselves. We always think our community is doing poorly. Our community is doing amazing. When I talk to people in the Christian world, they look to us to see why are they succeeding? What are they doing that's right, that can be replicated in their own communities? So there are people on the outside looking in to see the kinds of arguments that we're making and trying to transfer them to their own communities. So there's a broad, let's say varied, not a big group, but a varied group of people who are reading this book and who I associate with in both online and in the real world.
I think it reminds me of a quote I once heard, I believe from Professor Weiss Halivni, who said that the people who I enjoy talking to, I can't daven with. The people I'm allowed to daven with, I don't enjoy talking to. But if I had to do one or the other, I'd have to stick with the people who I daven with because they're the Ovdei Hashem, which reminds me of your quote about the intellectuals. But you've been talking a lot about Hashkafos, and the book is titled Articles of Faith, Belief, Emunah. So if you clarify the difference between Emunah and Hashkafa, are those the same thing? Are those different concepts, and how do they interact with each other?
So you're asking a question on multiple levels. I'm not quite sure which level you're talking about. So let me talk about both. On the, let's say, on the conceptual level, Emunah is a belief. And this is something that Beis Halevi says. There's a Beis Halevi, I think, in Parshas Beshalach. He says that Emunah, I quote in the book, if I'm getting it wrong, it's in the book. Emunah, the Rambam uses conflicting language, at least in the standard translations, on whether there's a mitzvah to know Hashem or to believe in Hashem. Yediyah and Emunah. So the Beis Halevi says Yediyah is something that can be proven. And that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is Emunah, which is a step beyond what you don't know, but you just have faith, you believe. In that respect, Emunah is not intellectual. It's, I don't know if it's a personal choice or a personal inclination to believe. And the Beis Halevi actually says you cannot convey Emunah, you can't convince someone who doesn't have Emunah. It can't be transferred. If something can be proven, say mathematical proof, so you can prove to someone else that is true. But Emunah is something beyond that, and it has to be conveyed in a different way. And that's something that I explore in my chapter on faith in the postmodern world. How do we convince when we can't? Yediyah is not a part of it. You can't prove it anymore. So that's on one level. On another level, I use faith here in a much broader way. And this is actually something that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs used to get in trouble for. When he used the word faith, a lot of people thought he meant Hashkafa and Emunah, and he wasn't consistent that way. And sometimes they would misunderstand him and misconstrue what he was saying as less traditional when he used the word faith, and they thought he meant Emunah. Faith is also a broader term about religion in general and religious attitudes, cultural attitudes. Faith, Judaism is a faith. Judaism is not only Hashkafa, Judaism is also halacha and Mesorah and minhagim. Faith is a very broad term. So when I use articles of faith in the title of this book, I meant it in both ways, meaning both in terms of Hashkafa and Emunah, because a lot of the articles talk about Hashkafa, as opposed to some of my previous books, which generally spoke about halacha. But more than that, I think of faith, and really this whole book is one way of grappling with the main challenge of modernity that has only been exacerbated by the internet. And that is the challenge between, on the one hand, independence, and on the other hand, authority. Modernity gives independence to people. Democracy gives independence to people. We no longer have a community, a kehillah, that literally can punish people for not keeping the commandments. Maybe socially that can be done to some degree, but they can't literally put us in jail for breaking Shabbos. But the internet has made it even more, given so many more tools, and so much more freedom, and so many more ways to reach out beyond your Dalit Amos, that it strengthens independence. And that is a real challenge when we live in a community and we believe that there is such a thing as authority. There is religious authority, there is divine authority, and there's also rabbinic authority and authority of halacha. So how do we grapple between those two poles? And that's something that I've been thinking about pretty much my whole adult life. And that is something that I think the book, pretty much every single page of the book, discusses that on a sub-level, that struggle between how to balance independence and authority.
And just, could you zone in on what exactly Hashkafa entails? And then maybe could also segue to talking about the phenomenon which you discussed both in the forward and in the afterword of being hashkafically homeless.
Okay. So in the technical sense, the first chapter of the book is about the Yud Gimel Ikarim, the 13 fundamental principles of faith that the Rambam listed, and how binding are they? Are we allowed to stray from the Yud Gimel Ikarim or not? And there have been challenges to that, particularly the book published by Professor Mark Shapiro. And a lot of people they mark the lives between before reading that Mark Shapiro book and after reading the Mark Shapiro book, because it just opens up your eyes that there are a lot of varying opinions on matters of Hashkafa going all the way back to the Rishonim. Earlier, Yaakov, I was saying how the Rishonim were right. Yeah, which Rishonim? Define a Rishon. So he quotes a lot of different opinions, and I don't agree with all of his interpretations, but that's beside the point. There are definitely some Rishonim who went beyond Rambam's 13 Ikarim, and the question is, what do we do with it? How do we define our own Hashkafa? How do we have a community of believers when we can't even agree on what we believe? How do you have a community? If some people believe this way, some people believe that way, how do you interact? So I argue that even if he is right, that there are different opinions that are outside the Yud Gimel Ikarim, that doesn't mean that we can't define our beliefs as a community. It's a matter of halacha, what the beliefs are, because if someone is outside those beliefs, there are halachic implications, and therefore the halachic process applies, and a posek can say, this is what we believe, and this is what we don't believe, or not what we believe. And he could draw a circle and say everyone inside it is part of the machana, part of our community, and everyone outside of it is not part of the community of believers. So I argue that there is a way of determining what is hashkafa, and I also argue that different poskim will disagree, and they might have sub-communities of believers, and that's how the halachic process works. But there is a general consensus with the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikarim, more or less, and that's the technical definition of hashkafa that I think we have to use in order to function and not be paralyzed in practice. But to the point of the last chapter, which is the hashkafically homeless, so there is slightly different. And I think this is something that really, so I mentioned there, Rabbi David Bashevkin, I think he coined the term, and I footnote one of his tweets on the subject, the hashkafically homeless. And what that means, the way I use it at least, and I think the way he uses it as well, is that every human being is on a journey. We're not finished products. We're part of a process. And where we are when we leave yeshiva, or when we're in yeshiva and then we leave at the age of 20-something, in my case 22, so where you end up 30 years later is not always going to be the same place. You move. Your attitudes, your circumstances, your experiences will move you. And the people you interact with, right? There's a famous Rambam that in Hilchos Deos, that we're all influenced by the people around us. So we're all influenced by the rabbis that we have, the college courses, graduate courses, the books that we read, right? I encourage people to read books. That's going to change them. And they might not be in the same place as their rebbeim. So who do they take guidance from? If you can't take guidance from your rebbeim, then I forget the sports term, independent agent? Is that the term?
Free agent.
Free agent. Are you a free agent then? You don't have any Rebbe? Once you hit the age of 40, you're a free agent and you don't have to follow your Rebbeim anymore? That's ridiculous. None of us are experts. Some of us are experts, but none of us are experts at the level that we can be making these own decisions without guidance. Everybody needs a Rebbe. Even your Rebbe needs a Rebbe. Everybody needs a Rebbe. But if you have deviated, if you've moved from where your Rebbeim were, or maybe your Rebbeim moved, they're also human beings. They're also on a journey. Maybe their journey has taken them a little right, a little left, and you moved a little right, a little left. So where do you go? I offer a few strategies on how to deal with that dilemma of being hashkafically homeless. You no longer, you don't have a home to go back to, the yeshiva. So where do you go? You have no home. So one of the things I try to make the point is that listen to people, to respect people, and your Rebbeim, hopefully, are not fools. The internet is full of mockery and cynicism. And anyone, let's say any gadol says something, it'll be mocked almost immediately, and the newspapers will report it probably incorrectly. So first of all, find out accurately, what did he say? And then why did he say it? If you respect your Rebbe, go to him and ask him, why did you say that? Not in an accusatory way, that never ends well, but have a conversation. And you'll probably leave there convinced that your Rebbe is a sensible person. You might not agree with him, but he might have explained it to you and say, okay, he has his perspective. That's not my perspective. And that's super important, because if you feel like even the home you used to belong in is garbage, then you'll reject so much of your background and your history, and it's very unhealthy. It induces in you a cynicism and an anger and a bitterness, which is just spiritually unhealthy. So it's important to respect people who say things you disagree with, particularly when you disagree. Find out if you don't feel comfortable talking to him, talk to someone who you respect, who agrees with him. Find a local rabbi who is of that hashkafa and talk to him about it. And number two, the internet has been such a bracha, and that we can hear multiple voices. So if the yeshiva, if your Rebbe is no longer for you, find another Rebbe. Rabbi Shalom Raza, your uncle, right? So people listen to him. And if you haven't, he's very busy, but you could reach out to him and you could probably have a conversation with him or an email with him or something like that. And there are Baruch Hashem, so many great people. You recently had on Dr. Erica Brown. If someone feels, reach out to Dr. Brown. She's fantastic. And she might be an area of guidance, a person who can give guidance to you as well. There are many people. So everyone needs some sort of, if not a Rebbe that you follow 100%, someone who can give you guidance, or multiple people who can give you guidance, so you're not a free agent. If you're doing things on your own, you're set up for failure, and it could be devastating to you emotionally, psychologically, and family-wise, and community-wise. You want to be part of a community, make yourself part of a community. Baruch Hashem, we have online communities now. It's not the same as an in-person community, but it gives you support and guidance, and we all need support and we all need guidance.
That's very interesting. When you describe that journey from your years in yeshiva to beyond, and how things change and you're changing and the Rebbeim are changing, what it made me think of is the fact that, if you're in yeshiva, so you're still young, you still haven't really experienced life, you're starting to grow up intellectually and emotionally, but you're still not totally there yet. So it's very easy to connect to a very, simplified, polarized picture of right and wrong and good and bad. And that's wonderful when you're at that stage, but then you sort of move on. So if you assume that like that beautiful clarity of being young and then discovering the Mesilas Yesharim and really connecting to the, it's either good or bad, it's either black and white, black or white. So that's very, very nice, but it's not really realistic to assume that should be the baseline with which we measure ourselves throughout the rest of our lives. And just to add one more thing is that, life is complicated. There are a lot of competing ideas out there, and nothing here is simple. So even at in the fundamentals of what you're saying is a sort of this maybe unrealistic expectation that I'm going to have a home in yeshiva, and that if I'm not able to stick with that throughout, I feel some sort of sense of disappointment.
I remember just a few years ago saying to someone that, I'm scared of my Rebbeim. I don't want to say, hey, do anything that they would be unhappy with. They give me a lot of leeway and let me do my thing, but I don't want to. And he said, you still at your age? And the answer is yes. I still care about my Rebbeim. I still talk to at least some of them frequently. I just spoke with Rav Mordechai Willig last night. I saw Rav Meir Tursky at a chasana on Sunday, and I still look up to them. And even if I'm not on the same page with them 100% hashkafically, which they never demanded or expected anyway, I still respect them and I care what they have to say. And I remember at the heat of the Slifkin controversy, just for some of your listeners, what that was, Rabbi Nelson or Natan, really, he was always called Natan Slifkin, published some books that were, in my experience, mainstream Hashkafa, but they were banned, and a lot of bad things were said about them, and a certain area of Hashkafa was declared out of bounds. So I took up his distribution of his books in America, and I also defended him a lot online, and I helped him publish new books. And I was very disillusioning to me that the Yeshivish world would take such a strong stance against views that are part of the Yeshivish world. I remember speaking with Noah Weinberg about it, and he said, don't listen to the Gedolim, they're wrong. That's what Noah Weinberg told me. So it was very disillusioning, the whole experience. I remember I had this conversation with Rav Mordechai Willig, and I said, look, I think I just need to throw out my black hat and join the modern Orthodox community. And then he said to me, he wouldn't say this to everybody, but he said to me, Gil, that's not who you are. There's no place in the modern Orthodox community for you. I mean, for me. And he just supported me and gave me guidance on what would be the mistake, would have been a huge mistake for me and my family based on these hashkafic controversies. But he also supported me and told me that I'm doing the right thing. Not every little thing that I did or said he reviewed and approved, but generally he was supportive. Rav Rosh Hashanah was also very supportive in those days of the Slifkin controversy, in the heat of that. But you go back to your Rebbeim, and hopefully you have Rebbeim who are somewhat open-minded and give you a little room. Once they trust you and they know you, they give you a little room to be yourself. They know they grew up. They know you have to grow up as well, and you should always be looking for new Rebbeim. And this is a rule not only in the life of a Ben Torah. Let's take a step back, though. Yeah, to me, the most important decision I made when I went out to work was to always wear a white shirt, at least in my home and when I'm not working. Work became business casual. I had to get striped shirts. Now, I know that's a personal thing. It's from where I was coming from, and the decision was not about style. I could not care less about style or fashion or what I wear, if it's new, it's old. I don't know if it's gray or white. They all look the same to me. The point was, I always wanted to be, in my mind, a Ben Torah. And in my mind, a Ben Torah wears a white shirt and a dark jacket and a black hat. And I'm not saying anyone who doesn't do that is not a Ben Torah. That's just my personal journey. And I decided for my life, I was always going to be a Ben Torah no matter how long I am out of yeshiva. And I still do that. And I still try to daven in yeshiva Minyanim whenever I can. And that's a self-definition of myself. And I think that's important for everybody to maintain that self-definition of you are a Ben Torah no matter where you go in life. I think, actually, this all happened decades ago for me, but I think Rav Aaron Lopiansky has a book about that, Ben Torah for life. So that's an attitude that is very important. And a Ben Torah is always learning, always finding new Rebbeim. So I try to learn. I think on the last podcast I told you I don't go to Shiurim unless the Maggid Shir knows more than me, which means when someone chashuv comes to town, let's say Reb Gershon Ribner, he's controversial, he's folksy, whatever, but when he comes to town, I go to hear him because I enjoy his jokes, but he has never said, he doesn't know me from a hole in the wall, he has never said in front of me anything that I found offensive one bit. In fact, I find him in person, I find him very charismatic and interesting, so I try to, I don't really consider him one of my Rebbeim, but when important Chashuva, Rosh Yeshivas, and Rabbanim come, you go hear them. And that way you're constantly learning and constantly finding new people who might be a positive influence on you.
One of the things that I hear sort of in between the lines, maybe not so in between the lines of what you're saying, is that there's this whole discussion we've had on the podcast in many different ways and shapes and forms of the fact that there's this world of Torah institutions. There are wonderful yeshivas and wonderful schools, and there are students, and there are teachers, and there are Rebbeim, and there are Avreichim, and that's a whole sort of world of institutions of Torah. And then there's everyone else, all of us, the Balabatim. So you seem to be saying that for you to be a Ben Torah is to try as much as you can to attach yourself to that world instead of maybe saying, I'm going to build myself a world which is independent of that because I'm not really there anymore. I'm not in yeshiva anymore. So what's your take on that sort of whole dynamic and how we can be changing the discourse between everyone who's been in yeshiva but is no longer in yeshiva full time and how they view themselves as B'nai Torah?
Yes. So yes and no. Meaning, yes, you should attach yourself, go to yeshiva minyan, whenever you can. It's slow, it's painful, but that's good. You should be used to. You want the slow, painful davening. You want to remember that and feel it in your bones. That slow is good. A davening that doesn't it's a and not a singing davening, A real yeshiva minyan. Again, I'm completely biased. I admit I'm completely biased. Everyone could discount what I say on these things, but yeah. And you should be talking to Rebbeim, talking to yeshiva, Ramim and yeshivas, meet them on the street, tell them what you're learning. I saw Rav Meir Tursky at a chassan on Sunday. I told him about the most recent article that I was writing, and he slugged it up in one sentence. He asked me one question, and that destroyed the whole article. But that's the kind of conversation I want to have. It's a good conversation. It keeps you part of, one foot, part in the yeshiva world. So in that sense, the yes, you want to feel like you're still part of that world. On the other hand, the no is that yeshivas are geared towards people who are, let's say, 18 to 22 years old. Okay, fine, so kolos, they're usually not geared to people beyond the age of 24, 25. Even though there are plenty of people still there, they're doing their own thing. They're not going to share usually. So they're speaking to young people. You're not young anymore. You're not their audience. You have more experience, you're more mature. A lot of their jokes and their extreme statements are intended to get young people excited. And it might be disillusioning to people who are older, or you might think, why is he's being so immature? He's being immature for a purpose. The Rebbe is being immature for a purpose, in order to educate his Talmidim. And you're beyond that. You need to find Torah on your level. And I don't necessarily mean your level of depth, but your level in terms of learning, but your depth in terms of your age and your maturity and your understanding. But leaving yeshiva gives you an incredible opportunity. When you're in yeshiva, you have to follow the derech of the yeshiva. You want to be a brisker if you're in a brisker yeshiva. But once you leave, you can learn your own style, find what works for you. B'kiyas is good for you, go for b'kiyas. You like halakha l'maisa, you could do that. It's an incredible opportunity to expand your wings. And honestly, I don't feel that I had hatzlacha in learning until I left yeshiva, when I could do my own thing. And that's when I really started taking off, because I wasn't constricted. I didn't constrict myself into what the yeshiva was teaching is the proper way to learn. I learned my own way, and it just naturally evolved, and it works really well for me. And honestly, my Rebbeim encourage that, and probably everyone's Rebbeim would encourage that. You like the daf, do a daf a day. You like something else, do something. So that's one area, one aspect of how you can grow on your own once you leave yeshiva. The other is the yeshiva intentionally leaves a gap in your Jewish education. And it's horrifying, but it's done purposely, intentionally. But once you leave yeshiva, that's your opportunity. Everybody, the minute you leave yeshiva, you should be learning Tanakh, learning Nach from cover to cover. Just read it with translation, a parish, mitzudos. I like the mitzudos. I use the mitzudos. But whatever it is, everybody needs to know Tanakh. It's just embarrassing that we don't know Tanakh. And embarrassing we don't know Kuzari and Emunas V'Deos and the Rambam Mor Nevuchim, and learn every Ramban al Torah. Find a way. I can't tell you exactly how to do it, but these should be goals, and that will help you develop more mature understandings of Judaism in general. It found leaving yeshiva was an incredible opportunity for learning on the one side. On the other side is I had to be in a day job from 9 to 5 or whatever. But it's a time for growth. But while you're growing, that's when we have the danger of becoming hashkafically homeless. And you need to attach yourself to people who can guide you and inspire you and support you on your path. Sometimes we make bad decisions. So either try to figure out on your own, maybe daf yomi is just not good for you and you should stop it. And if you don't realize that, sometimes a Rav should be there to tell you, daf is not for you. You shouldn't be doing this. So you want to have sources of guidance and inspiration.
Okay, this was so interesting. We did a lot of things in the first chapter where we spoke about Hashkafa and Emunah, and there's still a lot to talk about, but we're going to transition to our next chapter, which is that you subtitle the book, Traditional Jewish Belief in the Internet Era. And the Internet era is a reference to a few things. First of all, a lot of these books, a lot of these essays were originally came out as online articles on Torah Musings on your website. And you also talk a little bit about the internet itself in the book, especially the attempts by certain communities to ban the internet. And I'm wondering if you could start with that point specifically. And I'll say personally, and I don't think this is a controversial thing to say, is that the internet has been a huge bracha in my life and also a huge call in my life. So maybe talk a little bit about that dynamic and what your take is on that in the book.
So this really goes back to what we were discussing before about trying to find a balance between independence and authority. I'm not talking about the schmutz on the internet. Big problem. Stay away from the schmutz. I'm talking about the time waste aspect of it. Big problem. Stay away from it. None of us are perfect. You're going to make mistakes. I'm still seeing advertisements or statements that the nature of the internet is you can lose your neshama with one click of a button or one click. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to say. You will not lose your neshama with one click. Chas v'shalom. There's always tshuva. You make a mistake, you move on, you fix it, you do better. We have Hilchos Tshuva. Remember, Hilchos Tshuva for a reason. You won't lose your neshama just for clicking on the wrong link. But you have to recognize your mistake and don't do it again. And take steps to make sure you don't do it again. Putting all that aside, I believe the real challenge of the internet is the level of independence it gives us, and it takes us away from spiritual guides, and it makes us the balabas. We make our own decisions on everything, and that's not healthy. It's good to make a decision, but you need guidance. And it exposes us to all sorts of opinions, both other Orthodox opinions, not the way of your. My blog was mentioned once in the Wall Street Journal, only once in the Wall Street Journal, because there was some atheist who was trying to advertise his book on religious blogs. And apparently I was one of the few who caught it and rejected the advertisement. To reject an advertisement is a big deal because we're not making much money off this. So any money we can get. But I saw it, I'm like, that's not for me. So I rejected it. And the person who was placing the ads told the Wall Street Journal about it, and they interviewed me for that. Because there are atheists who are trying to get into the religious world and draw people away. That was a long time ago. I don't know how often that happens now. But we have to be careful on what we're reading and read critically and think critically. We are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. So in theory, we can read just about anything and emerge with our emunah intact. But the reality is that people are biased, and people are not always thinking straight, and people have emotions and moods. So you have to be very careful. So the independence aspect of the internet is freeing. People find it free. It frees them. Let's say you're a Hasidic younger man, and you have the whole world open up to you for the first time. It's amazing. All sorts of things, which are wonderful. The zoos and the animals and the geography and the minerals. You can find out so much about so many places in the world. All sorts of beautiful landscapes you can see. But you don't want to leave your community. You don't want to leave the community of Ma'aminim. You don't want to leave your little community where you feel comfortable. You have to. The question is, how do you find the balance between that independence that the internet offers you, and on the one hand, and the other, the authority of the community and the rabbis and Hashem in general. And that's why I believe banning the internet is possibly the worst possible option. Because people who are striving want freedom and independence, and you want to teach them how to balance that with authority. You basically tell them, we don't want you to have any independence. So what's going to happen is some people will say, fine, I give up my independence. And the other people are going to say, we don't care. You don't understand us. You don't get it. They might fake it. But the proper response is to find a way to help people make the best decisions, the decisions that are best for them. And there are actually programs out now to get people to choose to have dumb phones, not smartphones. There's some gevir who is subsidizing it. You could get a free or a cheap dumb phone, but that's allowing people to choose. And that's the key. The key is it should be people's choice. Because now they're making that independent decision. They don't want the internet on their phone. So I don't have the answers for everything, but I believe the key to guiding people through this complicated situation is to helping them make the right choices and finding a good balance for themselves wherever they happen to be between the independence on one hand and their authority on the other.
So you talked about the importance of critical thinking in this regard, and that is certainly something which is very important. You mentioned an anecdote in the introduction to the book, which some of the articles were written on the couch when you're very tired from your phone. They're all from your phone, but some of them were late at night when you're very, very tired. And there is a critique of internet content in general that the low barrier to entry opens it up to cheap content, to shallow thinking. And I'm wondering what you make of that. Is there some sort of tendency for people to not think things through properly, to not read things with a proper critical eye, specifically in the internet realm of Torah and ideas?
So there's a Maharal, Nesivas Olam, in Nesiv HaTorah, I believe, Perik Yudaled, where he talks about studying secular subjects, in particular going to college and studying from a secular scientist, which some of his Talmidim did. They studied astronomy, the Maharals, like the Tosas Yontif. So the Maharal permits reading the book, but not going to the lecture, because he says when you go to the lecture, you can be swayed. You be swayed by the persuasiveness of the speaker, his rhetorical tricks that he uses, or his style, similar to a debate. He doesn't talk about debate, but similar to the debate. The person who wins the debates are completely, in my mind, largely useless. They don't come to, at least for the point of coming to the truth. It's not a truth-seeking enterprise. The one who wins the debate is not the one who has the best arguments. It's the one who speaks more convincingly. It's a matter of which debating tricks you use best. So, I love Ben Shapiro like 90% of the Frum world, but, he uses a lot of rhetorical tricks, but he uses them well. So I admire it as a form of art. But reading is much more of an opportunity to think about the ideas without people screaming and shouting and diverting attention and using all sorts of tricks. Now, there are writing tricks as well. So you have to be a critical thinker. But of all the different things you can do, I believe reading is the best way to arrive at the truth. But you do have to have proper training, or at least build yourself up so that you can, you have the background. Someone quotes a Moreh Nevuchim. If you don't know what the Moreh Nevuchim says, you might think that that's a good proof. I mean, there's a book on biblical criticism by Professor JTS where he quotes the Rambam and says the Rambam agrees with me. And if you look at the Rambam, it's utterly ridiculous. The guy is completely misrepresenting the Rambam. But if you don't know what the Rambam says, so you might be convinced. So first of all, always look up original sources. Don't trust any claims that seem a little bit outrageous. They probably are outrageous. But reading is the best way of all the ways of finding the truth. And through practice makes perfect. That the more you read critically, the more you think about it, the better you get at critical reading.
Okay. I want to transition to a few questions that were submitted from our Quiet WhatsApp group. I invite all listeners to join our Quiet WhatsApp group where we have opportunities like this one to submit Q&A questions. And on this topic of the internet and the Torah, we do have a question which says as follows. There's so much good quality Torah content out there online, both written, audio, podcast, shiurim, especially Stark Tank, and even video like YouTube channels, etc. Can you say what your own method of filtering or curating this is? How would you suggest someone find the Torah things he connects to while balancing real scheduled learning? That's even another question, so you can take that where you want.
That's such a good question. It's a very difficult challenge. So I tell you what I personally do is first of all, the shiurim that I know about already, some of which I used to go to in person, I continue. Like Rav Hershel Schechter's Parsha shiurim are just, I love them. They're out of this world, and now they have like multiple years of history. So Parshas Toldos this week, so you can listen to 10 years of Parshas Toldos from Rav Hershel Schechter if you could find the time. Each one is, let's say, 1.5 to 2 hours, so I don't know where you find the time. So one is the shiurim that you know about. Continue. Now, if you want to find new things, so word of mouth is the only way. I didn't know who this Shirley Bornstein guy was until someone mentioned to me I should listen to his daf shiur. I don't even learn daf, but he has shiur on every daf in Shas. So whatever daf I was learning, I listened to Shirley Bornstein. I'm like, oh, Taka, this guy's really, really good. And I met him, and I live in New York, so he's in Brooklyn pretty often. So I met him. Wonderful guy, and this shiur is out of this world. I hear people talking about Rabbi Shalom Rosner, so you could go on there. Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, word of mouth is the best way. I always prefer Gedolim. So Rav Asher Weissman, his shiurim are available. But different people like different things and different styles. So you got to try different things. Yaakov, you started a podcast, right? This podcast is less than a year old, but it's taken off by word of mouth. Because if you like it, share it with your friends. And if your friends like it, they'll share it with you. There's a fellow, I've known him for a long time, Joel Rich, who writes on Torah Musings every week he publishes what we call the audio roundup. He listens to the shiurim, so you don't need to, and he gives you a brief summary. So check out his audio roundup, see what you like, what appeals to you, and then try it out. You want to, generally speaking, you want someone who comes from a background that you feel comfortable with. I know you have varied listeners, so depending on which yeshiva, which hashkafa, which community you're from, so you might want to focus on that community. Rav Gershon Ribner has a lot on. People are recording him and putting him on. If that's your thing, great. And trial and error. That's all I can recommend.
Okay, and flipping from the consumer side of the online content, another question on the internet, but on the producing Torah content is, do you have any advice for someone who wants to follow in your footsteps, quote unquote? I'm not sure that's a great idea, but someone wants to do that, so to speak, in the current internet media landscape. In other words, let's say he was a new post-receiver professional today and wants to write up Torah thoughts on a frequent basis to share with his friends and have some online people chaverim. What would be the equivalent of a blog on the internet in the years 2024, 2025?
Okay, so there are two levels to that question. One level is, where should he go now if he wants to start doing something? And the other is, how do you become like me? So let's start from the easier question is. The easier question is, where do you go now? Now it's either podcast or Substack. Today, it might be different tomorrow, but today everything's on Substack or it's on a podcast. So if you want to share with your friends, you can either start a Substack, which, look into it. It's really super easy, and then people subscribe to it, and Vizo, and maybe start social media accounts and post them to your social media accounts. Might grow, might not grow, but that's not the point. The point is you're writing and you're sharing, and that's the ikar. The ikar is to be boreach min hakavod, and you're writing for the sake of learning yourself and teaching anyone who happens to want to learn it as well. And the same with speaking. You give divrei Torah, or you interview people, you start a podcast. The ikar is not how many people you're reaching, is what are you doing and why are you doing it. You can't expect, I have to be in the right place at the right time, and I took off for that. There were not too many blogs in those days, and the blogs blew up, and I just rode the wave. I can't tell you what's going to be the next big thing. So either you want to be the first or among the first to do something, or you want to do it better than anyone else. And better than anyone else. So if you want to be the first, try. I don't know. TikTok. Also TikTok. If you want to do TikToks, that's a thing today also. But if you want to be better than everyone else, so either you do exactly what they're doing and just do it better. Someone's writing about halacha, you write about halacha better. You quote more Makomos, or you're even more clear, or you have some other way of doing it better. That's one thing that might take off. It might take off. The other is do it a niche, like Yaakov, you did. You found a niche. Podcasts are not new. Podcasts are old. But you started a podcast and you're succeeding because you found a niche that no one was addressing. You got to look where the hole is and try to fill that hole. And if you're looking for your own kavod, it's going to run away from you. What you want to do is you want to be useful to people. And if you try to be useful to people and you actually are, you'll see success. Whatever that success means, I can't tell you. But if you're filling a hole that needs to be filled, you will find success. Hashem will, I give you the bracha, and Hashem should bless you, that anyone who's trying to help other people in this sort of fashion will succeed in doing it.
Okay, we have a few more questions on the topic of your career and business life. So what have you found to be some of the day-to-day challenges as a Ben Torah in the office, and how did you deal with them?
Okay, so the biggest challenge I found, this is going to sound very strange to a lot of people, but a lot of people are going to understand immediately what I'm talking about. And that is part of the interview process, and also part of the culture in the workforce, is to talk about your successes, to brag, basically, about good things that you did. That interview is just telling them about how great you are. And I found that extremely difficult to do. I had to be taught by other people who had to yell at me, no, you need to talk. And so you have to find a happy medium in which you talk about your successes, but you do it in a humble way. You don't brag too much. You don't really brag. So one way to do that, interview is different, but one way to do that in the workplace is to schmooze with people about what you're working on. I had this one time, someone was taking credit for work that I did. He was in a manager's meeting. I was not a manager. He was invited to a manager's meeting for whatever reason, and he started telling people about the work that he had done, and I had done it. It wasn't him, but thankfully, someone was in the room who said, "You didn't do that. Gil did it." And then afterwards, she came over to me and said, "You won't believe what this guy was doing." I don't know how much it has happened in the past, but what I learned to do from that experience is to just go around and schmoozing with people and say, oh, yeah, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. Maybe they'll have insights. Maybe they'll have interesting things to say. Either way, first of all, they'll know that you're contributing to the company. They'll think of you as someone who works hard. And they'll also know specific projects you do without you having to brag about it. It's not, I've accomplished this, I've accomplished that. It's just, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. Also, you should always be, especially if you're a manager, give credit to other people. Because no one, first of all, that's the right thing to do. And second of all, no one will believe that you had nothing to do with it. So don't give credit to other people when you actually had nothing to do with it, because then you're implicitly lying. Be generous with credit, because people recognize that's just good. That means you're a mensch. But it also lets people know what you're working on without having to be immodest.
I really like that. And I also very much struggle and very much identify with what you're saying about struggling to self-promote, although it is a skill that has its very much an important place if you want to get, even just to avoid layoffs or to get promotions or get hired different positions. So I'll appreciate that, and we'll definitely apply that starting tomorrow. Next question. You've had some ups and downs in your career, layoffs, job changes, shifts. What were some of your coping mechanisms during these timeframes?
So, so I would say my main coping mechanism is there's an attitude I had when I started out. I don't get my covered from my job. I barely talk about it. Most people don't even know I have a job. So many people think I'm employed somehow in the Torah world, which I'm not.
I mean, this podcast has done a lot to break that conception. People will come over to me and say, wow, like, oh my gosh.
It's just, I don't get my coverage from my work. So when I was laid off, I didn't feel like I was useless. I didn't feel like I had no purpose in the world. I don't find meaning and purpose in my job, and maybe that's a bad thing. I know a lot of people like to find meaning and purpose in their work. I'll tell you, Yaakov, when the global financial crisis happened in 2008. So when there was a talk about some companies that are too big to fail, and if this company goes down, the whole economy will collapse. And people are saying, well, why is AIG so important? Why is Lehman Brothers so important? And it was at that point that I fully realized that what I do as a small cog in the wheel of insurance and finance actually helps people in the real world. The Wall Street supports Main Street. So when I, as an actuary, help someone get insurance or enable someone to get insurance for their business, for their home, for the whatever, I am helping them be more productive. And that was something that helped me find meaning in my work, because otherwise I'm just moving numbers and dollars from one place to another, and it's just completely meaningless. It's just a job, a way to make a parnasa. Everybody needs to put food on the table. So when I got laid off, I didn't have a parnasa, and that was it. I still had my learning. I still have my family. I still have my community, still giving shiurim and whatever, still writing, still have my blog. And it's very important. Everybody has their own lives, but to have a life to your kashivas, you're covered. Covered's not the right word, but the meaning in your life is not from work. So work is replaceable. You go from one company to another. That's just a minor detail. So people you're around, but your real main, the ikar of your life is not in that world. And to some degree is also that I find great meaning in learning. My menuchas nefesh, my calmness in life comes from a Black Gemara. So whenever I feel stressed out, I would open up a Black Gemara, and that would just completely calm me down. So when I was in difficult points in my career, and laying off was nothing compared to being worked too hard, when you're under a lot of stress from all the work, the Black Gemara just really took me out of that. Some people, it's online shopping. Some people, it's, meditating. Hopefully, Ben Torah finds that in the Parsha or in Navi or in whatever you're doing. Somewhere in Torah, that's a great way to take your mind. You're not thinking about your work problems anymore, because you're completely focused on the learning. And it's just a way to step out of all that stress and all the craziness. It's incredible.
Okay, last question from today. It's from a listener named Yaakov, and he wants to know, what is your favorite Shark Tank episode?
I can't see the problem with that, Yaakov, is you've interviewed quite a few of my personal friends. Say Ido Lavi, we were in yeshiva together. Zivi Mendelson, we were in high school together. I know Dr. Erica Brown. Rabbi Sachs is one of my idols. And I should mention 3 chapters in this book are about Rabbi Sachs and to some degree dedicated to him and exploring his Torah. So I can't answer that question. It's an unfair question. And Yaakov, I know you, as I mentioned before, I know you, I know your parents, I know your grandparents, I know your great-grandparents. Anything you do in my book is great.
Well, I threw a lot of tough questions at you. I wasn't expecting that one to stump you, but thank you so much for joining us today, and appreciate all of the Torah that you shared in the book, in these episodes, and beyond.
Yeah, it was so great. Thank you, and thank all the listeners for paying attention and for coming up with such great questions.
Okay, thank you. That's our show for today. If you enjoy Stark Tank, the best way to show your support is by hitting that subscribe button, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing this episode with a few friends. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.